Yo, 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 what's up? This is Nation Outside Season Change. My name is Cam, and I'm your host with Tamir.
And I'm your co-host T Mac. We got the privilege to speak with one of the most intelligent, articulate, flyest brothers that I know, uh, Mr. Hakim Crampton. Brother, do us the honor of introducing yourself and tell us a little bit about some of the things you got going on.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks for having me. Appreciate this opportunity to speak with y'all, brothers. My name is Hakim Crampton. I'm currently the government relations liaison for Citizens for Prison Reform. I'm also the founder of the Academic Mentoring and Education Network, which is a consulting, training, leadership development organization focused on youth and adults that are impacted by the criminal legal system and impacted by the education system. I've been doing this work, man, really from the incarceration period. I got locked up in 1991. And while I was incarcerated in 1991, I understood that people like me needed to be advocated for. Uh, and as understanding that people like me need to be advocated for, I allowed myself to be utilized by the system, by the brothers in the system that needed a voice, that needed someone to articulate what was happening to us. I started working with nonprofits from prison. I became a consultant from prison to nonprofits, helping them build and write their programs, develop their programs for them. I was a peer evaluator of their grants. And that carried with me all through the 90s into the 2000s when I finally came home in 2006. People in the community knew who I was because of the things I did from inside the prison system, having such a huge impact on people's lives. And that just translated right into the community. And so in 2006, um, the MDOC's, what's the name of the program? It's called something else now, but it was called originally the
NPR program.
MPRI program, Michigan Prisoner
Michigan
Reentry
Reentry.
Initiative.
Yeah, yeah.
They launched it in 2006 in October in Jackson, where I live at. And I just was out by a month. And I walked up in there, no registration, no nothing, only formerly incarcerated person inside the whole building.
That's right.
One of the few black people inside the whole building, to be honest with you. And I introduced myself to everyone I could talk to there. And because I was on the Interstate Corrections Compact from Wisconsin, I wanted to talk to the Michigan Interstate Corrections Compact, find out what it was going to be like for me on parole here in Michigan, being coming from Wisconsin. And so that kind of opened the door up to the MDOC, to the systematic side of criminal justice, advocacy and reform. And the parole supervisor in Jackson, Elisha Picard, she recognized my value right away. And that helped me to understand that there's an opportunity here to use my voice, to use my experience in this lane, in this space. And she fought for me to get inside the MDOC, and they just wouldn't allow it because I was fresh out on parole, So they was like, "No, you can't come in the system." So even to this day, they've still blocked me from coming inside MDOC. But that just really opened up the doors for all of the work that I was doing in communities and schools, in the juvenile justice system. And ultimately, around 2013, 14, people started seeing that there could be a real organizational opportunity for formerly incarcerated people to begin getting involved in leading the way. Prior to that, it was Catholic charities, religious fellowships and things of
Yeah,
that nature,
yeah.
who's been doing the work since the founding of prisons in this country in the late 1700s, early 1800s. But now it's understood that people like us who were formerly incarcerated, we were valuable enough to where we could lead in this space. So around 2014, Glenn Martin founded Just Leadership USA with the slogan that those close to the problem are close to the solution. But critically, the most important part, what people leave out, is that those individuals that was closer to the problem and close to the solution, they were furthest removed from the access to the resources, the power,
Absolutely.
the opportunity to really do something about it.
Yeah.
And so, having a friendship with him and whatnot, that ultimately led to me being a part of Just Leadership, working for Just Leadership for 7 years, 6.5 years or so. Worked for them, became one of their leading trainers in the flagship program, Leading with Conviction and Emerging Leaders. Was a part of the original organizing group of Nation Outside in 2016 with my brother Kevin Harris. And so I just been in this space, man, doing a lot of work for a long time, particularly, in the education system, because we know that that's where it really starts at for a lot of us. Once we get kicked out of school, we drop out of school, chances are that three-quarters of us is going to be in the prison
It's
system.
over with.
You know what I mean? So that so-called school to prison pipeline, which I call the nexus to youth crisis, the nexus to prison youth crisis, that really kicks in the education system. So that's where I really was doing a lot of my work at to impact the juvenile justice system, try to set us off from going to prison in the first place.
Let me ask this question. You said that your agent saw value in you, right?
The
So
parole
the
supervisor,
parole supervisor, right?
yeah.
You also talked about doing the work while you was inside. I'm wondering, and I don't want to be too assumption um, oriented, but when you got to prison, did you already have that value in yourself, or did you somehow find that value on that road? Because um, to me, um, that's what's missing. That value, that self value, is missing in brothers and sisters that's incarcerated, which then is like the biggest barrier to them being a value of their community. So, when did you find that value in yourself?
Yeah, it definitely emerged in the inside, but it was the rebirth of what was already really in me as a child. And, growing up in the crack epidemic, we were break dancers, we were graffiti artists, hip hop was new, and I'm from that era. But in 1985, things kind of just switched like overnight, really. I caught my first case, unfortunately, in 1985, just before I turned 12 that year, and I was locked up with a felony as a juvenile. And when I came home from the juvenile, it was like everything changed. It was
Mm.
like crack was in the streets. And so I lost focus. All the gifts and talents, the intelligence, the education I had inside me lied dormant. So I was involved in the dope game, you know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? Been shot up, et cetera, et cetera. So when I went to prison, and I went to prison for a crime I didn't commit. And that's really what allowed me to open my insight up, because had I went to prison with something I did, I would have just been in survival mode.
Yeah.
But because I went to prison with something I didn't do, I was like, no, I'm not supposed to be here. This ain't supposed to be my life. Why am I here? How did I get here? And it was those questions that really opened up, the spirit, opened up the soul, opened up
Mm.
my mind, and the change began. And what really happened was, one of the brothers who used to do our services inside prison, our religious services, one day he just disappeared. And this was in our quarantine at Dodge Correctional Institution. He disappeared. They transferred him to another institution. And everyone was like, man, he gone. What we gonna do now? I'm sitting there saying, what we gonna do now? They was like, brother, you gotta get up and speak. I'm like, me?
Yeah, you
What you
next.
mean? I get up and speak on what? You know what I mean? Like, brother, you gotta get up and do the thing. The brother gone. And so that was the first opportunity for leadership recognition.
Okay.
You said people saw a value in me that I didn't really understand and see in myself. And so I led with that the whole time my incarceration. I was the youngest appointed imam of the Muslim community in
Mm.
Wisconsin. I was 20 years old, not even 21 yet.
That's
And
dope.
all the elders in the community was like, who was this young kid? Like, who are
Hmm.
you coming in here, et cetera. And I didn't know what journey I was really on. I had no idea what my life was going to be like while I was there. And I just knew that I wanted to focus on me and develop me and come to grips with who I was and what happened to me in the world. You know what I mean? Because I seen it was I looked in there, it was just us. So what's next for me? And so that's how it began.
Okay.
Do you believe that opportunity, that when they gave you that leadership opportunity, that's when that shift and switch happened?
Yeah, definitely, because the responsibility, the trust kicked in immediately, that understanding the dynamics of prison life and being a part of a group inside prison life, you know, a lot of times life and death will be in your hands, when you're in a
Hmm.
leadership role, you know what I mean, of other people's situation, other people's safety and health and well-being, and the trajectory that their lives are going to go in. I understood that was a big responsibility I had, to be really supportive of individuals, making sure that they become the greatness that I seen that I could become. You know what I mean? So in 19, I got locked up in 91. By 94, I was already bringing in outside nonprofit organizations in what we used to call an annual seminar. So I would bring in 6, 7, 8 different nonprofit organizations. And this was really a plan of mine. I didn't fully understand it as a re-entry plan, but that's what it was, because I was hoping to connect the brothers inside with the organizations on the street. So when you get out, you connect with them brothers and sisters on the street that got organizations. It was reentry housing organizations, which that word wasn't even a word yet to me.
Hmm.
But the brother Salim El Amin had an organization. We brought the sister Antonia Drew in, who had a domestic violence organization, and I ultimately helped build up their whole organization. They were an organization that was incubated under an organization called Harambe, and they were what was called a Women of Sisters Project or Women of Color Project, and they reached out to me and said, "Hey, we need a program, a domestic violence program created by men who abuse women, because y'all, we got to stop y'all from abusing us." because they had just been really, dealing with the advocacy of supporting women who were abused. And they was like, well, really, if we jumpstart everything and go to the abusers and get y'all to stop abusing, we wouldn't even be in this predicament. So I went around the institution and said, who got any domestic violence history? Who done, slapped a woman before? Because I personally didn't, and I rarely ever seen it in my life. So I gathered a group of brothers together, and we built a whole entire program. And they received, a lot of money for that grant that we wrote, that program that we wrote. They wrote the grant, we wrote the program. And that program still exists in Milwaukee, Wisconsin to this day, 30 plus years later, 32 years later to be exact. So, I understood that what I was doing was valuable and important, and it just needed to continue to, maturate into, all these years later, the work that I'm doing now, there's a real foundation for it.
Yeah, it sounds like something that I think anybody who's been inside the system know and understand is that we believed in and know that pure lead stuff worked before pure lead was really a real hot coin phrase, right? Because we've always known we have to look out for ourselves. If you want to become rehabilitated, if you want to have some type of change and impact, it's not going to come from the system. It's not going to come from the institutions. It's not going to come from the ward. You got to get around like-minded individuals, and we are the ones who take care of each other, look after each other, and sometimes the reason why you might live or die, because like you said, you might have the power to press that button, right, or at least get a green light or the okay for something, or to kill something. So I just wanted to uplift the fact that we've been doing pure lead stuff, right? It's the rest of the world that's catching up to the importance of pure lead stuff.
Yes, definitely. So I just want to just touch on some of the things, like let us know what you're doing now and give us a call to action of how we can assist you and help you with your journey and stuff.
Yeah. So right now, I'm working for Citizens for Prison Reform as a contractor, as their government relations liaison, working as essentially their lobbyist to a great extent. I do other things within the organization, but the organization was founded by a mother who, like my mother, had a child who was incarcerated, and then realized that there's a lot of advocacy work that needs to take place. So this organization was founded by a family member to support families of loved ones who are incarcerated. So the organization principally focuses on what does families need while their loved one is incarcerated. And so some of the specific objectives that we're focusing on right now are legislation that would really impact the way in which the system operates that affects the families, right? Because if you're a loved one, you're locked, say you're a family member and your loved one is locked up, chances are they're experiencing limitations on access to visitation. So we have a visitation rights bill that's now broken into three main parts, but the two most important parts of that is the legal visitation right for a family member to see you and for them to see you, right?
Absolutely.
And then the second component of that is clergy visitation, because since COVID, our clergy are no longer able to just really access people incarcerated no more. They have to go through the same exact process as a family member and be subject to the same exact rigors and standards of missing visits, showing up late or something. They don't have access anymore like they used to. So we're fighting for a bill right now that we're working on the draft for that bill. That's the less accomplished bill that we've had right now, but we're working on that, and we have some sponsors for it, and we've got drafts of it. But primarily, our second bill is the Corrections Ombudsman Oversight Bill, and this bill allows the department to not the department, but the state legislature to be able to oversee the Michigan Department of Corrections, which currently there is no real oversight. There's a corrections ombudsman, but he's just a liaison, meaning that he can go in between the department and the legislator and give them updates on what's happening. And he can take, referrals for, investigations and things like that, but he doesn't have any power. He doesn't have any real, genuine power. So this bill we've crafted and put together was voted out of the Senate unanimously. It now sits in the House. The House has, instead of taking the bill up as it is, as SB 156, they decided to break the bill up into a couple bills and give it to a couple different sponsors. So they're going to be introducing the bill package as a whole in three separate bill packages. And that will still meet the same objectives because it's going to allow the corrections ombudsman to really have power to show up in institutions, to conduct real investigations, to spend money for investigators, expert witnesses, expert investigators to go inside. For example, in Women's Huron Valley, we know that what's happening there is egregious, the conditions of confinement. But the correctional ombudsman can't do anything about it. And when it comes to investigating the conditions of confinement, the Department of Corrections does that themselves internally.
No accountability.
With this oversight bill, he will be able to hire a third party to come in and do the investigation, to do water testing, samples, et cetera, you know. So that this bill is important, and it's important to family members who have a loved one incarcerated. For example, if you're incarcerated in Michigan right now, there is no legal right for the institution to notify your family member if you go to the hospital. They don't have to. So part of this bill is that there's going to be a requirement to make proper notifications, emergency notifications. And it's going to start with when you first come in the system, they're going to give you a form to fill out that allows you to designate my mother, my uncle, my brother as a person who should be informed of anything about me. If I'm locked up in segregation, if I'm, placed in the hospital, et cetera. Our last bill, importantly, is the solitary confinement bill. This is a bill that's important because we know the severe harms of solitary confinement, what it really does psychologically to people, and then how it's practiced, inside the Department of Corrections. It's really egregious because they will ultimately lock you up and have you locked up for weeks, months, years, and some people decades. So this new bill would limit the amount of time you can spend in solitary confinement to a total of 15 days. That's in accordance with the Mandela Rules. The Mandela Rules is promulgated out of the United Nations, right? And it's been adopted by the vast majority of the countries around the world. America and a few other countries refuse to adopt it. But so the Mandela Rules would limit it to 15 days per occurrence and no more than 45 days in a 180-day period. Mm-hmm. So you can only do a total of 90 days in a 360-day period, right? Because we know the severe consequences of what happens when people are isolated. So we have a solitary justice launch coming up, project February 28th, this weekend, as a matter of fact, this Saturday. We're going to be launching the project here in Detroit at the Sri Tanadar Center, rolling out, our mock solitary confinement cell that really shows people what it really looks like for somebody to be stuck and isolated in this small space 23, 22 hours a day, basically, So that's happening this February 28th at 3 o'clock.
All right.
Awesome.
Go ahead.
Can you give them the socials and stuff to follow you?
Yeah, so, you can hit me at Hakim Crampton, Hakim Crampton. I'm on Instagram at Spoken Flow Poet. I'm on what they call it, not the Twitter, but the TikTok. Hakim Crampton. Our organization is Citizens for Prison Reform.
Showing your age, brother.
Yeah. We on YouTube. We're trying to boost our YouTube channel right now, so we just uploaded some new videos to YouTube.
Want to tell about your books?
Yeah. I wrote about 24 books while I was incarcerated. Only one of those books have I published since I've been home. I got 9 books published right now. My latest book is an Amazon bestseller called Making the Case for Justice, an advocate's journey in social, criminal, education, justice reform, really highlighting the work that I've been doing since I've been in the community. So it's some of my advocacy campaigns, some of my essays that are in that book that highlights the specific work that I've been doing in the community.
All right, we about to wrap this thing up, but before we go, first of all, I just want to thank you for all the work that you do, how you've been holding it down, right? One of these pioneers in this thing called reentry, right? Social justice reform. Like I knew about you before you knew I existed because your name was ringing in these streets, as they say, right? So I just appreciate that. But before you go, I would like you to give us a story, or for you to tell us like one of the dopest things you've been able to experience or do, whether that's firsthand or secondhand, since you've been home.
Yeah. I use this story a lot, really, and it's kind of unlikely to be a story connected to the question you asked, but it's an important one. When I first came home from prison, I was mentoring kids in school, trying to keep them from following my footsteps, right? And after speaking at a particular class from a government government civics class, I was on my way back the next week. And as I was coming up the stairwell, I heard some young girls talking. And I kind of heard their whole story. The young girl was talking about how the night before, all her girls got locked up and they're in juvenile custody right now. She was like, I remember hearing the guy who be coming to our class story about how he went to prison with something he didn't do. She was like, and it just kept being on my mind. She was like, so I left and went home and they all got locked up. And I appeared at the top of the 3rd floor and she was like, that's him. That's him right there. And that really hit me emotionally because it let me know the impact I was able to have on somebody's life, because that's the reason I was there, to be a reminder to young people that you ain't got to go that route. You see what I'm saying? So that is the most impactful story to me, that emotionally impacts me as well, to know that I had that kind of impact in her life.
Definitely keep planting them seeds.
Yes, sir.
So definitely. Once again, this is Nation Outside Seeds of Change. I want to thank you, Brother Hakeem, for coming just to sit down and talk to us.
Appreciate y'all for having me.
No doubt.